This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Hello, and welcome back to Photographing the West. This is episode number 89. With all the news and photos of Comet Neowise, I thought it'd be fun to talk to an expert in astrophotography. So here with me today is Matthew Dieterich. Welcome, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. Happy to be a part of the show. This is awesome.
Did I get your name right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, good German name there, I think.
Yep.
So tell me, how did you get started in astrophotography?
Yeah, so a little background. I started back in, I guess it would be high school. So it was about 15 years ago, and took an astronomy class, had a telescope that I got for Christmas that year, and, was living in bright city lights of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was seeing cool things through the telescope. But one of the interesting things was they advertised the telescopes with photos on the box, which you think they're going to see it through the telescope. But I soon realized that those were actually long exposures through a camera that has been attached to the telescope. So I joke saying that false advertising got me into the hobby of astrophotography, and I just really fell in love with the process of using the equipment, the computers, and the art side of editing. So it's been an addicting hobby for the last 15 years that I just want to share with everyone and get them excited about nature and the outdoors.
Sure. Well, I think you succeeded in the goal. Looking at your website and your photos, so
thank
good
you.
on you.
Yeah.
So astrophotography has a reputation of being very technical and very expensive. Is that still the case, or are there easier ways to do things nowadays?
It's 100% great question. So I remember back when I started, I was actually using film, and I wasn't getting any results because obviously imaging with film is very difficult, especially when you're trying to learn astrophotography. So when I was starting out, there finally was the Canon, I think it was a 350D or their digital Rebel DSLR that came out, and it was very expensive back then. But the ironic part is now the equipment has gotten so cheap relatively compared to what it used to be, that there's a lot of cameras on the market that allow you to do this cool astrophotography, and all you need is a camera, a lens, and a tripod. That's majority of what I use is pretty minimum and relatively affordable if people buy stuff on the used market and that sort of thing. So it opens up more people to get into the hobby because the equipment is less expensive nowadays, which is awesome.
Right. So you don't necessarily need a telescope or any of that stuff, huh?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, if people want to use a telescope to photograph kind of more dim, smaller objects in the night sky, that's a great way to do it. But very capable cameras and lenses and tripods are easy to photograph the night sky away from city lights. And small tracking mounts now. There's a few that are available now for under $500 that will kind of keep the motion of the stars pinpoint to correct for the Earth's rotation. So that lets you do long exposures and record more detail in the night sky. People are liking to do that kind of work nowadays.
So talking about hardware, what do you recommend as far as lenses and trackers and tripods and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times most of the photos on my site when it comes to the nightscapes are primarily just with a Nikon D750, or I've started using a modified Nikon Z6. And when I say modified, all that means is there's companies that will take out the filter that's in front of the camera sensor, because the stock filters will block the red emission nebulae light that's from hydrogen alpha. So they'll modify it for $200, $300, $400. send it back, and it lets in that beautiful red that's in emission nebulae in the night sky. So I've been shooting with that mirrorless from Nikon, 24 millimeter lenses or 14 millimeter. But the key for that is I love shooting f1.4 or f2.8 at kind of the lowest. The f1.4 obviously lets in a lot of light, but I like doing panoramas because with the f1.4, there's a lot of coma in the images at the edges of the frame just because you're shooting wide open. But you know, f1.4 to 2.8 lenses, those are the key for shooting in low light. And the wide angle 14 millimeter is always a good choice from Nikon. I really like that lens and has served me well, for the last handful of years. Let's see. Tracker wise, yeah, there's a lot of them now. I use a Skywatcher, Star Adventurer Pro, and I think it's like $400, but it's portable. I mean, the thing's only like this tall and goes on your tripod and threads onto the tripod, and you could do longer tracked exposures with, like a 50 millimeter lens or even a 200 millimeter lens. So you can do some more zoomed in magnified shots.
Sure. So I'm assuming if you're doing the tracking and everything, at least you need a sturdy tripod, and probably even if you're not.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a old, enduro just photography tripod kind of thing, and it's aluminum, but nowadays there's the good carbon fiber tripods that if you're hiking, the carbon fiber will save you a couple extra pounds of carrying gear just because they're lighter. But it's pretty minimal equipment. I think that's why I've enjoyed doing the nightscapes more so than the deep sky. The deep sky astrophotography is the stuff like through a telescope. So I've enjoyed doing the nightscapes because you can enjoy the night sky more because you get to hike around and actually kind of experience the night sky more than focusing on a computer screen, which is necessary for like deep sky. Deep sky is a little bit more involved.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically a sturdy tripod, a camera that will let you photograph the night sky, and I assume the larger the sensor size, the better, huh?
Yeah. I guess I forgot to mention that you could do this photography with the smaller crop sensor, APS-C size sensors, but the full frame camera sensors they're so inexpensive nowadays, and that's kind of the scary thing compared to 10 years ago. So full frame is definitely recommended, and people will see the difference because they have less noise in the images, and you could push the ISO, the sensitivity up pretty high when you're doing these nightscape images.
So speaking of ISO, what ISO do you usually shoot at?
For most of the shots, it's used like for the single. Most of the times, I do single 15-second photos with the 24 millimeter lens, and that's usually ISO either 5000 or 6400. So it's up there pretty high, and but it allows you to record so much detail in the night sky with that, and you get minimal star trailing because you're shooting at the 15 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the old rule used to be the 500 rule. What do people recommend these days?
That's the old rule still exists, and I talked about that actually in a vlog that I recorded when I was at the park just last week. So same thing, you divide your focal length by 500, and that's about as long as you could shoot on a full frame sensor before you get some star trailing. So it's about, I think, 15 or 16 seconds for the 24 millimeter lens, and with that 14 wider angle 14 millimeter lens, I think it's like 33 seconds. But 30 seconds, you're seeing a little bit of movement, but that's usually what I'll do with the f2.8 30 millimeter f2.8 14 millimeter. I'll do 30-second photos.
Okay, so you want to be a little conservative.
Yeah, and it's just because, with obviously if you have the shutter release cable, the intervalometer, you could do more than 30 seconds, but most of these cameras, you either have the longest as 30 seconds or it'll push you over to bulb mode where it'll just be shutter release cable that will let you stay open for as long as you need.
Okay. So is intervalometer either in the camera or external a good piece of equipment to have?
Yeah, especially for definitely external. I grab mine on like Amazon. You can get the cheaper ones that run on AAA batteries, so you could quickly replace if you ever run out of batteries. But in the field, especially useful for time lapse photography, where you're taking long single photos, and just like you're taking a regular nightscape, but you continuously take those photos for hours, and then you can make a nice smooth time lapse video in software with that. So the intervalometer will just keep taking the photos until the camera battery dies or until you want to stop it.
Okay. So talk about the software, because there's various kinds of stacking software and things you
Yeah.
can do too. So
Yeah, so most of the time, most of the shots that I do are, especially for nightscapes, are single exposure, but I'll use Photoshop to do a lot of the stacking, or the blending, I should say, of when I do panoramas. So panoramas, I'll shoot and overlap a big field of view of photos and overlap each photo about like 30%, just so Photoshop can recognize one photo and it'll merge them together. And that's
right,
how I do the bigger panoramas in Photoshop, which it has a good function on running that automatically. And then I'll edit that as obviously a main single image and kind of adjust it from there. But there's some new software that people are using now to do they're stacking very short photos at high ISO to reduce noise. One of them was Starry Landscape or something like that. Starry Landscape. One of them is for, I think, Apple or Mac only, but there's a Starry Landscape stacker or something like that. But the other one is Sequator, Sequator, and it's for Windows. But if you take all these nightscape images of, say, the Milky Way at high ISO, it'll stack those even with landscapes in the field of view. So that's a cool software that's available now, and it's free. You don't have to pay for that one. I've seen some people using that, but I ironically haven't tried it yet to see how it works. Just because I get stuck in my old ways of shooting, and I just
sure.
keep doing the same techniques, kind of thing.
Yeah, do what works.
Yeah, exactly.
So you include a lot of the landscaping, a lot of your photos. So talk a bit about composition as far as astrophotography.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the shots I've enjoyed, going to dark sky spots, away from city lights. And a lot of times you're in, you could be in the mountains, you could be in the desert. Um, but I think for me, it's trying to relate the scale of the night sky to the landscape, and having the landscape, whether it's, like I said, a mountain or trees or water. I really love finding places that have still bodies of water, because you can get the Milky Way in the night sky reflecting in the stars, which is really cool. So, I think everyone has a different eye for composition, and getting out to dark skies is definitely key. Because I've seen some amazing photos on social media from all over the planet, but I think the key is trying to find something unique. Still following your rule of thirds of, putting the Milky Way not in the dead center of the image. Offsetting if you have some cool foreground objects to shoot. But I think for me, it's the night sky is always so impressive that no matter what landscape you find, it still can be a compelling shot. But still bodies of water, mountains and trees, those sort of landscape objects, I try to seek out if possible when on trips.
Sure. Talk about how to find dark skies. There's lots of different apps out there, I think.
Yeah, there are. There's a really good website now. It's Dark Sky Finder, I believe is what it's called. But that one has done a good job with giving, a good overlay of where bright city lights are at and then where you can go to get away from them. There's the other website that it's more for planning around the weather of dark skies, but it's the Clear Sky chart. And you can go to the Clear Sky chart for many given areas in the U.S. and it'll also show you light pollution, and you can kind of click on the map and that sort of thing. But the Dark Sky Finder is way more intuitive, and you can actually click and scroll across the whole planet. Planet Earth. It kind of has mapped it via satellite and looked at the night sky brightness. So that's a good one to use, and I think that's free as well. I mean, it's just a website that you can use, so it'll help you plan if you have a quick trip to get outside of the city into the country and find dark skies. But of course, deserts are usually better. Places where you don't have tons of moisture in the air, like humidity. Humidity really scatters light a lot more than dry desert air. And the other thing is elevation. So if you're in the mountains, the elevation helps with being above some of the pollution and the moisture, and it makes the night sky clarity just so much more clear if it's a good night when you're visiting.
So you talked a bit about planning. How do you go about planning a shoot or a trip?
Yeah. Well, I think if you follow, I find myself following a lot of those rules of elevation, whether it's the mountains, dry, if I can get out somewhere where it's desert like, but you not always have the opportunity to travel to do these sort of, trips. But if it's bucket list style trips, there's places like Chile, which just has some of the most unreal night skies on the planet, Australia as well. So places that are very dry and elevated and have mountains and have very small cities, those are always, they're always going to have really good night skies nearby. But when I'm trying to plan other, maybe actually composition planning, there's the app called PhotoPills you might have heard about. PhotoPills will let you, it has this cool augmented reality, and it'll use your camera on your phone. So basically, you're holding your phone up and you're just adjusting date and time, and I could see the direction. Milky Way usually rises in the southwest kind of direction, so I could be holding my phone and I could be panning it over a lake during the daytime to scout. Scouting photography is, as you're probably well aware, is definitely important, and hopefully you get the right conditions when you go back. But PhotoPills will help you plan that. If you're there on site during the day, you can drive around and find some cool spots and use the app and just kind of play around and see where that Milky Way is going to rise. And like midnight, any given time, you could play with it, or the moon. So PhotoPills is a good app for planning and helping do some of the trips. But anywhere that's dry, dark, and elevated away from cities, there are going to be good spots for checking out the night sky.
Sure. So you probably want to avoid nights that are full moon and that sort of thing, I suppose, huh?
Yeah, correct. So you have each month. I mean, the Milky Way season in the northern hemisphere, but it's very similar. It's kind of identical in the southern hemisphere. Is usually from like end of March to beginning of October, end of October kind of thing. That's your kind of window of the seasons where you get the core of the Milky Way in the night sky at various times. If it's March, it's going to be very, very early morning, like 3-4 in the morning, likely. Closer you get to fall, the Milky Way core is going to be setting, not too long after dark, maybe 10 o'clock at night or something like that. So, but of course, you want to plan around, the new moon, they call it. New moon is when the moon is actually out during daylight. So at night, the moon is not in the night sky. So you get the darkest skies you can actually experience away from that. But even first quarter, when the moon is kind of that half shape, and then the third quarter when it's the opposite half illuminated, that could be so cool for getting light on landscapes. People have found a niche for photographing landscapes like that, with the moon kind of illuminating it at the low levels before the moon sets, or just when the moon rises in those phases.
So being a night owl helps too, I guess, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah, most people. I'm not much of a morning person, so I think this hobby has helped very much with that. It's easier for me to stay up late than it is to get up for a sunrise at 5 in the morning or something like that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm the other way around, but
yeah.
Well,
maybe one day I'll change, because I do miss sunsets, obviously, or sunrises, I should say. I miss out on all those kind of opportunities because I'm so used to staying up late with some of the photography when you're on trips. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's look at just some of your pictures. I'm going to share my screen and see if I can pull up your photos here.
But the comet is dimming and it's kind of heading back out of our inner solar system. But this comet kind of really came out of nowhere and started brightening in the night sky. And so this one I shot from Craters of the Moon National Monument when we were in Idaho there just last week. So the comet has this amazing big tail to it with it's a lot of different gases being given off from the sun heating up the comet. But then there's that blue tail that's coming off of it, and that one's called the ion tail because it's pretty cool blue, and there's charged particles coming off of it. So the sun just pushes all that gas and dust away from the comet. But this was with just a tracking mount, just a little sky watcher. I did 1 minute photos and was using the Nikon D850 with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens at f4 and ISO 2000. So I took 15 images and stacked them in an astronomy program called PixInsight. So it'll align and stack the photos, and then I'll edit the rest of the photos in Photoshop. So I actually made a YouTube tutorial about showing how I created this photo. For those that are trying to learn any of the stacking techniques, I wanted to share kind of my process on how I made this photo.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that, and I'll put that in the show notes so people can do that. Let's see, I'm going to move things around a little bit here, see if that helps any.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I love this one.
Yeah. People always ask me, I remember, and it was so unique experiencing. This was from Glacier National Park in Montana. And this was back from 5 years ago already. But the green in the night sky is called air glow. One word, air glow. And it happens, so the sun will heat up molecules in the upper atmosphere, mainly oxygen. And the oxygen, just like you have concrete on the ground that heats up and gives off heat at night when you feel it on a summer day, the molecules will give off light at night. So the camera can pick up this crazy color in the night sky. But the Milky Way there with the mountains in Montana was just spectacular, just on the side of the road. We just pulled off, and I did 4 images. This is a panorama of 1 photo, 2, 3, 4, just so I can get that nice rectangular field of view with the mountains and the lake. And untracked, just camera. This was the Nikon D750 with the 24 millimeter lens at f1.4, and ISO 6400 is what I shot this at. So very nice dark skies there in Montana. Just
Right.
beautiful. Yeah.
It's on the west side of Glacier.
This was on, I think, if my memory serves me correct, I think on the west side. So it was heading towards not too far from Two Medicine Lake. So I don't know if
Right.
that's the east side or the west. I forget from my memory there, but we stayed outside on the way on one of the portions. I know there's like many Glacier and all that sort of thing. We stayed in a little tiny place in front of one of the old railroad stations there outside the park. So it was just a beautiful little spot.
Yeah, guess so. Speaking of panoramas, did you use any special gear for your panoramas, or you just do it all by
No,
hand?
you're right. Yep. I just do it all by hand. Just, I'll just watch, I make sure the tripod is level. And nowadays these cameras have levels on them in the viewfinders, like the digital level. So I'll just, make sure that I just move it down enough to overlap. I'll kind of watch a star, and then I just make sure the star still is in that field of view. And then I go over and I do it just, 4 different times for this photo. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it turned out really well, I would say.
Thanks.
Okay. Let's see here. A couple people got in the way of your photo there.
I know. Yeah, it's like we planned that or something. Yeah, that was my girlfriend and I. We went. This was from Idaho, from Craters of the Moon last week. So I had a lot of people asking about this one because I shot this with just a single exposure and a 50 millimeter lens. So the camera obviously records a lot of light, especially at f1.4, but the Comet was just so bright. I was shocked at how bright it was. And, we were hiking on one of the trails at the park and photographing the Comet. And I knew I wanted to get a shot like this, where we're far away from the camera and you get that juxtaposition of big and small, like Comet really big and us just pretty small. So this was a single 15-second photo that we tried to stand still for it. I set my little intervalometer on like a 30-second delay just so I can have time to climb up the hill and get to that viewpoint so we could be there standing.
Yeah. Interesting composition, and that makes the difference between good astrophotos and not so good astrophotos, I think.
Yeah. It was a beautiful time to experience the Comet. Absolutely. And just, I had that pictured in my mind about trying to photograph something like that. So,
No, good job.
Thank you.
Okay. Another panorama.
Oh yeah, this one was fun. This was from Mount Rainier National Park. There's Mount Rainier on the right-hand side. This was a big panorama. It spans probably 270 plus degrees field of view, but this was spectacular because the Milky Way arcing and then the northern lights were occurring to the north as well. So I was figuring out a right way to photograph this, and I used that 14 millimeter lens, just 30-second photos on the tripod, and I would manually, move it, keep it portrait orientation, manually move it to just get that big field of view and have the photos overlap.
Yeah, that's something we really didn't talk about, but it's important to use the portrait view rather than the landscape.
Yeah, this one especially. Some of the times with my panoramas, I'll do landscape as well, but I kind of know I have to take a lot of photos to make sure it could turn into a big rectangular print when I'm done, kind of thing. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So, do you remember where in the world you were? Assume those lights are from
Yeah.
your center and that sort of thing. Huh?
Yeah, this one was, Yeah, this was from Sunrise at Mount Rainier National Park, so in Washington State. So,
Right.
but I mean, that was spectacular just seeing the Northern Lights there. And I did a little time lapse video of them moving while I was photographing this panorama. So I try to kind of kill two birds with one stone while it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great shot again.
Thank you. This was that same area, just down the trail from that last image. This was the Perseid meteor shower in August of 2015. So we lucked out with a moon that was in the new phase. So there was no moon in the night sky. So the meteors would show up because the sky was really dark. So we counted over 200 meteors that night. And what I did was I just had the tripod photographing 8-second photos because I wanted to get a time lapse of the Milky Way rising up over the mountain. And I took any frame that had a bright meteor in it, and I manually aligned it in Photoshop and would just put in the meteor where it was actually at in the night sky. So it was tedious, but it was exciting and it was worth it.
Okay. Yeah. So the stacking software wouldn't give you this sort of effect, I guess, then, huh?
Correct. I kind of did like a manual stacking with then selectively only, so it's one base image, right? But then the night sky was moving and the camera was stationary, but
Right.
the night sky moved because the earth is turning. So I had to manually take each photo in Photoshop and tip and tilt so the stars would all align, and then I would just layer mask in the meteor where it was at. So that's why you kind of get that raining down appearance.
Okay. How much time did that take you?
It was quite a few hours, like 3-4 hours or something like that. But it was an exciting one to try to do that technique on.
Yeah, turned out great.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got one more here. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one was also from Mount Rainier National Park, and this was on the other side of the park. This was over at Paradise, just down the road at Reflection Lake. So I worked there and I did astronomy education, and that one night I was helping a guy take a photo, and I noticed that there was a pink hue on his photograph, and I was like, oh my gosh, you just photographed the Northern Lights. And when we were done with that cool program, I knew I needed to face the north because that's where the Northern Lights come down from the poles in the northern hemisphere. So I went down to the lake and wanted to just set up a time lapse camera to just get the Northern Lights moving and dancing. So this was the result of a time lapse video, but I just overlaid all the photos to get the star trails and the pink Northern Lights in the background. So that was just a spectacular night to shoot that stuff because that summer was eventually turned into a postage stamp for the National Park Service. And, I've had a lot of people obviously ask me about that print, and it's kind of been just a great way to educate people on the night skies, especially in the National Park Service.
So do you sell your prints or?
Yep, correct. Yeah, I sell them. I do prints, and it's been a busy couple weeks. I've had a lot of orders for prints, which is good. And I make sure I sign and inspect all the images before I get them out to people. And I take a lot of pride in that because people hang these on their walls, and it's an honor that people look at our photography as art. It's spectacular. Nothing I would have figured many years ago would happen by just sharing the night sky with people.
How often can you see the Northern Lights that far south?
It depends on the solar cycle and a lot of that. The sun kind of goes through these cycles of sending out a lot of solar flares that would make these northern light activity. But That was, I think, Mount Rainier was about 46 degrees north, and they see it, multiple times a year, I'd imagine. But to me, it was black and white. There was just these columns of black and white that just looked like light pollution. But the camera, when I took a photo of it, man, it was beautiful. It just, the whole screen was pink, just because how high the northern lights were extending up. So that was, it was very special. So a few times a year, locations like that get it. And it's pretty special, obviously, when it happens.
So talking about your prints and so forth, talk about where people can find you and your prints and your videos and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so my website's just mattdieterich.com, and I use that same handle just on YouTube. I've been making some new tutorial videos and some videos to try to get people to learn about the night sky photography tips and tricks. And that's also just YouTube, / Matt Dieterich. And, all that's on my main website, the links to get to those places, especially, any of those using Instagram. But, new website has workshops, for people trying to get outside and learn these techniques that I'll take people on field trips to learn about it and photograph the night sky to some pretty cool national parks and in locations.
Sure. Well, it's been a great episode. I think I've certainly learned a lot and looked at some very beautiful pictures. So hopefully everybody will enjoy it as much as I did. So thanks, Matthew, for a great discussion and some good recommendations. And thanks to our audience on YouTube, iTunes, and other RSS feeds. Show notes are available at www.flanaganphotos.com. My nature clothing line is on Amazon, Etsy, and Redbubble, and my national park planners are available on Amazon too. I'll put all of the things that Matthew mentioned in terms of gear and his YouTube videos and all that stuff will be in the show notes, so be sure to look at those. Bye for now, and we'll be back on August 30th with a show about iPhone photography. See you then.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.